Hi, and welcome to our first full episode of Our World War II Dad. I'm Chris Cangilla alongside my brother Ken Cangilla, and we created this podcast to share stories of our father, Army Private First Class Louis Cangilla, who served in World War II in Europe. You know, Ken, once again, you researched Dad's steps overseas. You recently got back from seeing some of those areas in France, Belgium, Germany, and Norway. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So I've always had the desire to really follow in his footsteps and understand what it was like for him when he was an 18-year-old and in the Army. And so I had the opportunity, after having done years of research at home, to go to Europe. And I had some great people to kind of guide me along the way, and did some great research before we left, and was able to really see exactly where he was and understand the action that took place on those battlefields that he participated in 1944 and 1945.
Yeah, his world was turned upside down as many men his same age just changed overnight. Everybody had hopes and dreams and things that they were going to do, and it completely changed. Mm-hmm. You know, it seems like we need to learn more about what that time in America was like. You know, we need to talk to somebody who was actually alive and there during that incredible time in our U.S. history. Let's go to our mom. Well, joining us now is our World War II mom. Mom, I can't thank you enough for doing this. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you, and thank you for asking me to come.
Mom, it's great to have you on here with us. We got a lot of questions for you about the good old days, so I hope you're ready for some good answers for us.
I will do my very best.
Now, Mom, you know, you didn't know Dad when he actually shipped off to the war, right?
I was 10 years old and in 5th grade when your dad went into the service. So I didn't know him at all.
Mom, how did you first learn about the atrocities that started in Hawaii with Pearl Harbor?
My sister Doris and her boyfriend then had gone to the movies. When they came out, they were selling extra papers, and it said that we were at war. And when they came home, they told us all about it. Of course, we knew then that her boyfriend, Dick, was going to be going into the service. He went into boot camp, and he was gone for 6 weeks. And my sister Doris went to Mass every morning, and hopefully that he would be in the right place at the right time. Well, they sent him to Africa. And from Africa, they sent him to Italy. And the boy never got home for 3 years. Mm. My sister wrote to him every single day.
So, Mom, you guys learned about, you know, the start of the war pretty much from the extra and the newspapers that they brought home. What about during the war? How were you getting the information? Nowadays, you know, we look at our social media, we look at television. How are you getting information on what was going on?
Well, we had 2 papers that were delivered, one in the morning and one in the evening. We kept up with the news that way. And then we had a big Stromberg Carlson manufactured radio that sat in our living room. And of course, our father had controls of that, just like the TVs of today. And we would sit around the radio and listen to the news that way.
Now, of course, we all know that Americans were asked to do what they could, the ones at home, to support the war effort. What'd you guys do, or what'd you have to do without? Do you remember any of those things?
Oh, yes, I do. Butter and sugar were scarce. And I remember the story my sister told, that she went to the market to buy some pork chops. And she said to the butcher, I would like 4 nice pork chops. And he said, lady, so would I. You couldn't get them.
So I've heard the stories, I think, in the past that you guys would save bacon grease. What was that about?
Oh, yeah. Oh, anytime that Mom was rendering any kind of meat that had fat on it, she would strain it into an old Crisco can, and we would save it until it was full. Then I would take it to the butcher, and he would give me money for that grease. And I think, Kenny, you know what they used that grease for?
Yeah, I had to look it up, and they actually took that grease and would use it in some fashion to make glycerin that was ultimately put into explosives.
So that's what we did.
I know you're a good cook, Mom, so you weren't poisoning anybody, get rid of it that way, but you might have taken care of some Germans because of the grease that you supplied.
That's right.
Good work there. Let me ask you another question, Mom. A lot of Americans would reach out to servicemen, really make sure that they're sending them care packages and making sure that they're known that they're loved at home and that kind of stuff. Did your family take part in that at all?
Well, my sister Doris did. And she would make cookies, she would make brownies, and my dad would package them up so carefully and send them off to her boyfriend, Dick. Well, this one time she used my mother's mixer. And the next day, my mother went to use the mixer, and a metal nut was missing from the mixer. My sister immediately wrote to Dick, and fortunately, he got the letter before he got the brownies. So when the brownies came, he and his buddies took their little fingers and sifted through all the brownies until they found the metal nut. And he was in Italy at the time, and he mailed it back from Italy.
So at least you can keep that mixer working, even if
yes,
it's all the way to Italy and back.
Yes.
And quite a few nuts obviously came from Italy, since that's where our ancestry is from.
There you go.
There you go. It's Comedy Central right here. Yeah. What do you remember about victory in Europe, victory in the war? What do you remember about that happening and the boys coming home?
Boy, that was wonderful. As I said, my brother-in-law, Dick, was in for 3 years. When he called Doris and said, I'm on my way home, but we didn't know exactly when he was going to be home. And so she waited and waited and waited for another call. And she had to run an errand. So she did. And when she came back, we were all hustling around in the family room and getting ready to go somewhere. She said, where you are? Go on. And we're going down to the train station to pick up Dick. Wow. So we went and picked up his mother. And my dad said to my sister, you let his mother hug and kiss him first, which she did. So they dated for, I don't know, a year and a half, and then they got married.
So you can appreciate that, being a mother of 8 kids, that you would probably want to hug your son before any of our
That's right.
do.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. So it was nice.
Yeah, I'm just impressed with your memory, Mom, and always have been. Tell people how old you are right now.
I'm 91. I'll be 92 in November.
And Ken and I hope we get your genes.
Yeah. I want to hold on to my jeans for a while.
All right. You may still need to wear them, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Mom, I can't thank you enough for doing this. I know Kenny feels the same way.
It was my pleasure. Of course, I love seeing my boys anyway.
Yeah, it really helps us fill in some gaps. And you've always had a really good memory and really good stories about the old days. And it's amazing what you've seen change, over the years, from going from a little girl that just, listened to the radio or heard their parents read out of the newspaper about an event like that, all the way up to the technology we're using right now.
Absolutely. Yes. It was an interesting time, that's for sure. And how people reacted, and everybody wanted to do their part for the war. I remember buying stamps, and you save them in a book, and then you would get a bond when you filled that up. And everybody was doing that. We all wanted it to end such a way.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Mom, thank you so much for doing this. I hope that you'll be willing to come back on with us, because you know me, I'll get it wrong from time to time, and we need your help in getting more clarification.
I'd be glad to help anytime, Christopher.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom. You've been great doing this for us, and we look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Okay. Love you guys. Take care.
Love you too. Man, Mom was incredible on that segment. She did such a good job, and she's such a wealth of knowledge. And, at 91, so sharp still, to be able to recollect those stories. And she doesn't miss a beat.
No, man, she really doesn't. And you know what amazes me, being in this business a little bit, she knows all this information, but she has this knack for presenting it. It cracked me up internally, because I asked her a question, she answered that question, and then she tossed to you to give your opinion on it. It's like she's part of a roundtable discussion group.
Yeah.
that's on the news. She's great,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's not much that lady can't do.
No, it's absolutely amazing. I forget, that she is that age because she is so sharp and so with it and so physically fit. I really envy her.
Yeah, she's great. So
Dad's 99th Infantry Division is called up to Malmedy because there's basically 3 roads that will get them across the Meuse and the Germans across the Meuse and get them up to the port they want to take. So Dad is on the northern branch of that in Malmedy to block those routes of this big German push. And so they've got to get to Malmedy in a big hurry. And so they load up on the trucks and they head over to Malmedy and they arrive there on the 17th. Some get there on the 17th. The others arrive on the 18th of December.
wow. Now, you mentioned it earlier that you usually go and find these places
Yeah.
by visiting the town square.
Yeah.
Did any of the action happen in the town square of Malmedy?
Yeah, there's a great old photo that I even have it on my desktop of my computer. I love it so much. It's a great photo of Company D, not C. Dad was in C, but it was Company D of the 99th when they pull in on December 17th. And it's the town square. You can see the obelisk in the middle of the town square. I think it's called the Prince Albert obelisk or something like that. And the town square is just beautiful, but it's got all these jeeps and anti-tank guns parked in there. All this heavy equipment is pulled into the town square because they left in such a hurry. They didn't even really know what their assignment was. They were just like, get to Malmedy, because it was only being held by I think it's about 60 men that were in the engineer group. So these are guys that build bridges and stuff, but they dropped their hammers and grabbed their rifles. And so they were kind of hanging on till the 99th got there, and Dad's C Company arrived probably on the 18th. And
Wow.
it was so wonderful to step into that square.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because I remember, now that you're bringing it up, that you showed us this picture that you found of that Malmedy town square.
Yeah.
Gosh, maybe 2-3 years ago,
At
pre-pandemic, I think, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you showed that. And I'm like, well, let me use my detective hat on there. So I
Right.
looked at this amazing picture, 1944,
Yeah.
in the trucks and all the things that are there.
Yeah.
And then I went on to Google Maps and Google Earth, and I dropped myself right in that spot. I found that spot. And sure enough, a lot of those same things are still there. The obelisk, the church in the background. And
Yeah.
it's amazing. I mean, you can take a look at it and see it right there. And then you went to that same spot, right?
Yeah, that was probably the quintessential moment for me to have walked right into that square, found that exact spot where that photo's taken. And of course I had to have my wife take a picture of me standing there like an idiot. But you got to do it. And it's just beautiful. It's just a quaint village. You can tell it's kind of a resort town that's used a lot in the summer, kind of like our mountain resort towns or stuff up in Wisconsin for you guys. People
Sure.
go up there to cool off. So it's just a beautiful, quaint little town with this beautiful cathedral in the background.
Yeah, it looks a lot like Breckenridge, or even
Yeah.
the towns out here near Chicago, that like St. Charles or Geneva, these
Yeah.
older towns that existed on their own outside of these large cities.
Right. Right. Yeah. So it was a really neat town to see and stand in that square and explore the surrounding area. We spent quite a bit of time that day there. Yeah.
That's nuts. Now,
Yeah.
you discovered some other things when you pulled over near some railroad tracks, right?
Yeah. So, driving an RV, you got to find a place to park it every night. The good thing is you don't have to find a hotel room, but the bad thing is you got to find a place to park. Fortunately, in Europe, they're really camper friendly. That night, I had good internet signal. So I start, reading stuff again about Malmedy and things like that. And I'm reading excerpts from various books about Dad's troops. So this is an excerpt from a soldier named John W. Kelly. And he is in C Company. So Dad probably knew this man because they're in the same company. So he says, we deployed along a high railroad bank that crossed a long valley. C Company dug in along the hill on the left side of the valley. The men had hardly begun to settle in when the first enemy came into view.
So my burning question is,
Yeah.
did you just happen to park in the same area that this all took place?
Well, that's what's interesting is, when I'm reading this, I get out that morning and I'm looking, and we're in this parking lot, and it's a bus stop now where this building is, and I'm looking at the building, and I've been in Europe long enough to recognize what train stations look like because they live by the train there.
Sure.
And I'm looking at the bus depot, and it's a train station, you can tell. And then there's a walking path that is perfectly straight, and it's on the maps. It's called Line 45. Ligne is how they spell it, Line 45. And as you look at it, you can clearly see that that's where the railroad tracks were. They've been torn up, turned into a walking path and a bike path, and we're literally parked a grenade throw away
Jeez.
from where those railroad tracks are. Now, I don't know if Dad was exactly there, but he was awfully close to that spot.
And you could have picked any place to pull in for the night that offered, the RV parking, and you happen to pick this one. Do you ever get the sense, and it's kind of spiritual in a way, but do you ever get sense that Dad's finger is on your back, kind of guiding you where to go?
You have to wonder about that. For one thing, I had repeated these stories to my son Kyle. He goes, Dad, it's gravity. He goes, Grandpa's pulling you via gravity to those locations. He goes, it's got to be something like that. So he echoed your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's soldiers everywhere, but lo and behold, something really interesting happens. Dad's in Belgium, and his brother James, who's I think 5 years older than he is, he's with the 28th Signal Corps, and I believe they were fighting just a little bit south of Dad's positions. And somewhere in Belgium, he runs into his brother, and they have an opportunity to take some pictures together. And what a homecoming that must have felt like, to have been gone, since 1943. You're this young man. You've run into your older brother, which has got to feel good, right? You like older brothers, right, Chris?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. I don't get to run into you other than every week on this podcast, but I'd like to see you in person.
Right. Yeah. So he runs into his older brother out in this field somewhere in Belgium. I don't know how it happened, if they got wind that each other's companies were there. And so they get a chance to reunite. And it's one of my favorite photos that I found going through this things, because Dad's standing there next to his taller brother, and Dad's flicking him on the helmet, just jacking around instead of like taking the tough guy pose, and it just really, to me, captured the joy in that reunion.
Yeah, I saw that photo, and I thought that Dad was trying to measure that he was, maybe growing a little bit on his older brother, but he was flicking his helmet. Why not, right?
Right. I mean, it's just perfectly, what you would expect from brothers. And so what a reunion that must have been.
It's so cool. We discussed in an early episode of this series that Dad had his dad and his four brothers, I should say, all served in World War II. And in fact, they made the newspaper in their hometown of East Liberty, Pennsylvania. What an incredible time that was.
Yeah. So I come across this one photo, and it just really struck me. It's him leaning up against what I think is a tank destroyer. I'm not an expert on these vehicles, but it looks like a tank destroyer. He's leaning up against a tank destroyer, and it's just a great picture. Dad's got a cigar. He's got his head cocked, and he just looks, Chris, like a different man. You can tell he's grown up. He's experienced the war. He's experienced a lot of things that as that 18-year-old wide-eyed kid from Pittsburgh had no idea he was going to walk into. And so I went back and I compared it to a picture I have from a newspaper, and it's taken in Camp Croft, but he looks so young. And then I look at him. Here it is, 43. That was like spring of 43. Yeah, it's like 2 years later, spring of 45. He's in Barneville, France, and he's got a swagger to him and just looks fit, and he looks tough. It's just really kind of neat to look at.
Toughened by the war and the conditions he had to live under, and what he had to experience, for sure. It's so funny that you say this and how young these guys are, because every time I think about World War II, and prior to us having this discussion, I always think of these guys as, in my mind, in their 30s. That's what I see them at. When you watch these movies or whatever, you see them at their 30s. And maybe it's because they had such responsibility and they knew how to act and they take charge kind of guys, that I made them more mature. But they're 18, 19. Probably most of them are, under 22, 23 maybe?
Yeah.
The majority of it. So it's remarkable that I really have to think about that here's my dad, this hardened guy from war, this tough guy, and he's 20 years old. He's 19, whatever he is.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating story, but I have to go back to what kind of got me on this journey years ago. This is probably 10 years ago. So, Dad had this old credenza and he had all this stuff kind of crammed in there. And so I was over visiting Mom once and I, started talking to her about the war and stuff. She goes, well, look through this stuff. So I'm starting to look through it. And I come across like an old cigar box. You can tell it's old because I think the price of the cigars in it were 15 cents a piece. My son Wes would love that because he likes cigars.
There you go.
So I'm digging through it and I find this prayer card, and it's a 1945 calendar on the back of this prayer card, and on the front I think is the Lord's Prayer. So I flip it over and I'm looking at the back of it, and it shows the months and all the dates, so you know what day it is. And first thing I noticed is October 28th is circled. Well, what's October 28th?
Yeah, it's birthday.
Right. So he circles his birthday. I'm like, okay, I get that. But then I see all these little hash marks by just about 11 dates on the card. And I get to looking at them like, why did Dad mark those dates on the card? That was really interesting to me. And I got to thinking, soldiers, when they wrote home, they weren't supposed to say where they were and they would edit stuff out. So I'm thinking, knowing Dad, he wanted to remember certain occurrences. So I looked at the tick marks and then I started digging through the Howard Bergen's book and things like that. And sure enough, Chris, lo and behold, the card is my Rosetta Stone, and it opens up all of Dad's travels in 1945.
It's your principal piece of this whole adventure, right? I mean, because you wouldn't have known to go to these places. Sure, the 99th were certain places, but with these tick marks on this, prayer card, that your father was most likely in the same places where these battles took place.
Yeah. It was really neat that he kept it. And so, I looked at the tick marks and I'm like, okay, he marked January 18th. Okay, that's when they left Malmedy and went back to Tilf to get ready, for the next phase. Then another important date comes up, April 2nd. They have to go back to Aachen from where they went after Tilf. So they go from Tilf to Barneville, which is clear across, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Then back to Aachen. And then he has other significant dates, including April 11th, when they first crossed the Rhine into Germany. May 13th, he's in Regensburg. May 29th, they sail to Norway. And then June 4th, they arrive in Oslo, Norway. So these were significant dates. And since it's a new year, 1945, I want to take you through what was going on in those places he went to during those dates.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like you broke a code, you're a code breaker.
Yeah. So Dad's stationed in Regensburg. And of course, word spreads slowly, and there's going to be some devout Nazis that aren't going to give up. So they carefully have to work their way through these towns. So they're in Regensburg, and Dad gets an interesting call of a mission he needs to go on. And rather than hear it from me, let's hear it from the old man himself. Here's Dad talking about his mission in Regensburg.
There was a Prince Joseph of Austria. He was up in the mountains in Austria, and we were in Regensburg, which is just over the border from Austria. So myself and the lieutenant and I think one other rifleman were in the Jeep, and we went up there to help him, because he had some displaced persons that were getting rowdy, the Russians or something like that. And we had to get them out of there. They maybe harmed him or something like that. So we went up to the mountains, to drive to the hills. And while we were there, this Prince Joseph came out of the cabin, a log cabin, a big fancy cabin. And he had a long leather coat on. And I don't know whether he brought the gun or one of his servants brought the gun, but he brought this pistol I have, it's an Italian Beretta 32 caliber, and it had never been fired. So we drew lots for it, and I won it.
Wow, that was really good to see that again.
Wow, it's heartwarming.
Yeah. We're so fortunate that our sister Kathy, filmed that back in 1996. And it's so cute that her children, Emily and Steve and Sarah, are there around their grandfather, hearing these stories. And it reminds me that most of the stories that he told were, on the lighthearted side. He very rarely told anything that was scary, even though we know from the research that he went through some scary times.
Yeah, and those kids in that video that Kathy shot, they have their own kids now. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Things just keep on happening.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do we know what happened to that gun that Dad won?
Yeah, so he pulled it off somehow. He was able to get it back to the United States, and I did find some paperwork with it that said that he was allowed to bring it back into the States. So
Oh, wow.
he had kept it in a safe in the basement, and we rarely got to see it. And Mom still keeps it in a safe, locked up. And so this holster is really cool. Just this strong leather with this really cool flap on it that locks down. And then this is, the Italian Beretta that he was given.
Small.
Yeah, it's not a real big gun. It's 32 caliber.
Right.
And I did take out the magazine. It's very rusty. The spring's very rusty in it. But yeah, he brought it back, and our brother Phil at one time bought some rounds for it and took it out and he shot it. Yeah, he took it out to the range and he shot it. So, here's a real piece of World War II history that has a really kind of cool story behind it.
Yeah, a fitting gift for an Italian to get an Italian Beretta.
Isn't that ironic?
For sure. For me, seeing how young Dad was, right? I mean, we talked about it, 18, and just seeing these pictures of him as a kid.
Yeah.
Dad had me when he was 42. They had me later in life. And so he was always kind of my older dad, older than most of my peers' dads, So it was a little different growing up. What things I didn't have with him because he was a little older. I had this history, and the folks gave me this love of big band music, a dad that at other ages aren't going to give that to you. So there's some really cool things that happened because of Dad being the age that he is. And, and I see Dad in World War II, and he's the age of what my sons are. I have a son who's 23. I have another one who's 31. It's in that age.
Yeah.
And they're old for going through that. I just remember them at that age, and myself, like we talked about it, being 18. And that's just, those guys are incredible. The guys that served over there for World War II are just incredible. So it's a cool thing.
Yeah, I think about when I was 18, heading off to college as a freshman, and I went to a little community college, about 5.5 hours drive from home. And I left like the week before Labor Day weekend and drove all the way there, unpacked and everything. And I'd been there probably maybe 4 or 5 nights. And my roommate and I were like, well, what are we going to do? It's a 3-day weekend. We don't have school. So we piled back in the car because we were so homesick. And I think about Dad, he didn't have the luxury to go home after 4 or 5 nights. Once he was gone,
I'm sure he wanted to.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure he wanted to. And so, this poor young man who'd lost his mother, and I had said it wrong earlier. I said at 13, he lost her about a year before at 17 or 16. So, he's lost his mother. He ships off. He's overseas. He's getting shot at. And I'm thinking, man, when I was 18, I was, so homesick. I went home the first 3-day weekend. I'd been at school for 4 hours. And I remember Dad said to Mom, is he going to come home every weekend?
Sounds like something Dad would say.
Yeah.
So Dad told us in our last episode, he returned from the war by train to East Liberty, and he walked up those steps to his home. Unbelievable. It's just heartwarming, and it really touched me. Do you know anything about what happened next?
Yeah, so I was thinking about him walking up those steps, and if you remember in the home movies, the Kathy shot, he talks about he put his duffel bag on his shoulder and he walks up those steps. And I got to thinking about this, Chris. What's in that duffel bag? Okay, he's got other uniforms, probably so spare clothes and stuff like that, but he's also got in there the Nazi flag he confiscated. He's got the Italian Beretta pistol that he came home from Regensburg with that the Crown Prince gave him. He's got all the stuff that I went through that helped me piece this story together. He's got in that duffel bag, the calling cards, the pictures. It's all in that duffel bag, and he saved it all those years. And I was able to unlock the story based on that prayer card and the journey that he had made. So I think about him walking up those steps that way. Isn't that pretty neat to think about that?
Yeah, you're giving me goosebumps because everything that we discuss, this whole podcast is in that duffel bag that came home with him, and you unpacked it. So it's
Yeah.
Whew, okay.